They told me to ask my daughter instead. Out of everything I heard that week, those 6 words stayed with me the longest. Not because I didn't have a son. I did. My son was one of the youngest business owners in Tennessee to build a company worth millions before turning 32. His interviews appeared in local magazines. His weekends were spent at luxury golf clubs and charity dinners. Whenever people mentioned his name around town, they smiled with admiration. But when I found myself standing at the hardest crossroads of my life, people told me to forget about him. Call your daughter. The daughter who worked exhausting shifts at a children's hospital. The daughter who counted every dollar before buying groceries. The daughter who had never once claimed to be successful. Funny, isn't it? Sometimes the richest person in the family is the poorest when it comes to love. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm 59 years old, and until recently, I believed I understood what family meant. Turns out, I was wrong. I live in a small town just outside Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet neighborhood where everyone waves when they drive past, and kids still ride bicycles until the streetlights come on. My house has seen better days. The porch boards creak every time someone walks across them. The gutters leak whenever it rains. The fence in the backyard leans so badly I've promised myself to repair it every spring for the last 4 years. Life has a strange way of making small repairs feel impossible when bigger problems never stop arriving. That Tuesday evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The air conditioner struggled against the July heat, while unopened envelopes formed a neat little pile beside my coffee mug. Electric bill, insurance notice, county taxes. I already knew what each envelope wanted from me. Money I didn't have. Across the kitchen, my wife Linda rinsed out a coffee cup when her cell phone began ringing. She glanced at the screen. Instantly, everything about her changed. Her shoulders straightened. Her eyes sparkled. A smile spread across her face so naturally that for a brief second, I remembered the woman I married 32 years ago. "Ethan," she answered excitedly, "I've been waiting for your call." Without realizing it, she walked toward the living room, almost as if she didn't want me hearing the conversation. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. Her voice carried through the hallway anyway. "You actually closed the deal?" "Oh, sweetheart. I'm so proud of you." A few seconds later, she laughed. The kind of laugh I hadn't heard inside this house in years. Then I heard the number. "Over 8 million now? Ethan, that's unbelievable." 8 million. I stared down at the unpaid bills lying in front of me. Funny how numbers work. One family, one son celebrating $8 million, one father wondering how to keep the lights on another month. I wasn't jealous. Honestly, I wasn't. Every parent wants their child to succeed, but I couldn't ignore something that had slowly become impossible to miss. Whenever Linda spoke to Ethan, her voice filled with warmth. Whenever she spoke to me, it sounded like another responsibility she wished someone else would handle. Several minutes later, she walked back into the kitchen. The smile disappeared the moment she noticed me. It was almost like watching someone switch off a light. "Did you call the electric company?" she asked. "Not yet. They're not going to keep extending the due date forever." "I know." She slid one of the envelopes closer to me. "You need to figure this out." That was it. No. "How was your day?" No. "You look exhausted." Just another problem placed in front of me like I was expected to solve everything alone. I quietly nodded. She picked up her coffee and walked upstairs. The silence that followed felt heavier than the conversation itself. People often ask when marriages begin falling apart. Most think it's because of one huge argument, one betrayal, one mistake. They're wrong. Most marriages don't collapse overnight. They fade, one disappointment at a time. Looking back now, I can tell you exactly where ours started changing. 10 years earlier, I owned a small construction company. Nothing enormous, just enough employees to keep us busy year-round. We renovated commercial buildings, repaired schools, built small office spaces. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it gave my family a comfortable life. Then, an opportunity appeared. A developer announced plans for a massive shopping district outside the city. Everyone expected nearby land values to explode. After months of research, meetings, and financial advice, I invested almost everything I had into 45 acres sitting just beyond the proposed expansion. The numbers made perfect sense. Every expert agreed. Even the bank manager shook my hand and called it a smart investment. Then county elections happened. New officials took office. Funding disappeared. The project was canceled. Within months. The land that was supposed to secure my family's future became nearly impossible to sell. Loan payments kept growing. Interest piled higher. Banks stopped returning my calls. One by one. Everything I had built disappeared. I spent almost 2 years trying to save my company before finally admitting defeat. Losing the business hurt. Losing my family's respect hurt even more. Eventually, I accepted a maintenance supervisor position at a regional warehouse. The paycheck wasn't impressive, but honest work never embarrassed me. Failure did. Especially in my son's eyes. Ethan had just started graduate school when everything collapsed. He never remembered the years I paid for baseball camps, or the birthday trips, or the late nights I spent working overtime so he could attend the college he wanted. Instead, he remembered the vacations we canceled, the sports car he never got, the apartment he had to share with roommates, in his version of our family's history. His father simply failed. Nothing I ever explained changed that story. Thankfully, not everyone in my family remembered me that way. My daughter Sophie was different. She had been 17 when our finances fell apart, old enough to understand that life doesn't always reward good decisions. Every Sunday evening after finishing her shift at the children's hospital, she'd stop by my house. Sometimes she'd bring homemade soup, sometimes groceries, sometimes absolutely nothing, except herself. She'd sit beside me on the old porch swing and ask the same question every single week. Dad, how are you really doing? No one else asked that anymore, not even Linda. Looking back now, I think Sophie noticed something I was trying very hard to hide. Maybe she saw how often I stopped to catch my breath. Maybe she noticed the cough that refused to disappear. Or maybe children who truly love their parents simply notice things others choose to ignore. I kept insisting it was allergies, or the warehouse dust, or getting older. Anything except the truth. Because deep down, I think I already knew something wasn't right. I just wasn't ready to hear someone else say it. What I didn't know was that less than 72 hours later, a doctor would walk into an examination room carrying a folder that would change everything. But even that diagnosis wouldn't become the worst part of my week. No. The moment that truly broke me came afterward. It happened with a single phone call. A phone call I never wanted to make. I reached out to my own son, believing that somewhere beneath all the success, expensive suits, and business headlines, the little boy I raised was still there. I couldn't have been more wrong. The doctor's office smelled like disinfectant and stale coffee. I sat alone in the examination room, absent-mindedly tapping my fingers against the armrest while staring at a faded landscape painting hanging on the wall. It was strange what the mind focused on when it was trying not to panic. The cough I'd been ignoring for nearly 2 months had finally convinced Sophie to schedule an appointment herself. "You can argue with me all you want, Dad," she'd laughed over the phone, "but you're still going." She knew me too well. A few moments later, the door opened. Dr. Michael Reynolds stepped inside, carrying a thick folder. He wasn't smiling. Doctors don't realize how much a patient notices those tiny details. The way they avoid eye contact, the way they place a file on the desk a little too carefully, the extra second they take before speaking. Those moments say everything before a single word is spoken. He pulled his chair closer. "Daniel, we found something on your CT scan." My stomach tightened. "There appears to be a growth in your left lung." The room suddenly became very quiet. I could still hear the air conditioner humming overhead, cars passing outside, someone laughing somewhere in the hallway. Yet every sound seemed miles away. I finally managed to ask the only question that mattered. "Is it cancer?" He didn't answer immediately. "We won't know for certain until pathology comes back after surgery." "Surgery?" He nodded. "The good news is we caught it early. It appears operable. If we remove it soon, your chances are very encouraging." I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "So, what happens now?" "We schedule surgery as quickly as possible." For a brief moment, hope returned. Maybe everything would be okay. Maybe this wasn't the end. Then another knock came at the door. A woman wearing a navy blue blazer stepped inside, carrying a tablet. She introduced herself as Karen from Patient Services. I'd never met her before. 5 minutes later, I wished I hadn't. She explained that while my insurance covered most of the operation, a specialized surgical procedure recommended by Dr. Reynolds required additional authorization. Authorization my insurance had already denied. I listened quietly. Medical words blurred together. Deductible, coverage gap, appeal process, out-of-pocket responsibility. Then she finally reached the number. "You'll need a deposit of $4,000 before the surgical team can reserve the operating room." $4,000. She might as well have asked for $400,000. I stared at the floor. Karen quickly added, "We can discuss payment options afterward, Mr. Harper. But hospital policy requires the deposit first." I forced a smile. "I understand." She left. Dr. Reynolds gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "I wish the system worked differently." "So do I." I sat in my pickup truck for nearly an hour after leaving the hospital. The steering wheel rested beneath my hands. The engine never started. $4,000. I repeated the number over and over. I checked my savings account, then my checking account, then the small emergency envelope hidden inside the glove compartment. It wasn't even close. Years earlier, I could have written that check without thinking. Now, I couldn't even borrow it. The land investment had destroyed more than my business. It destroyed my credit. Banks stopped trusting me years ago. Friends who once called every weekend slowly disappeared. Funny how success attracts people. And failure introduces you to their real character. That evening, I didn't tell Linda everything. I simply mentioned the doctor wanted more tests. She barely looked up from her tablet. "I'm sure it'll be fine." That was the entire conversation. Meanwhile, Sophie called twice before bedtime. "Dad, how did the appointment go?" I almost told her. Almost. Instead, I lied. Nothing serious. They're just being cautious. There was silence. I know you're lying. I smiled despite myself. Since when did you become smarter than your old man? I've always been smarter. She laughed. Promise me you'll tell me if something's wrong. I promise. But I had no intention of keeping that promise. She already worked exhausting shifts caring for sick children. The last thing she needed was worrying about me, too. For the next 2 days, I searched everywhere. I called my insurance company. Denied. I applied for a medical loan. Denied. I contacted my bank. Denied. Each conversation ended exactly the same way. I'm sorry, Mr. Harper. By Friday afternoon, reality became impossible to ignore. There was only one person left I hadn't asked. My son. The idea alone made me uncomfortable. Not because I thought he'd say no, because I hated needing anyone, especially my own children. I spent nearly an hour staring at Ethan's number on my phone. Memories flooded back, teaching him to ride a bicycle, helping him build his first treehouse, driving 8 hours so he could attend a baseball tournament, watching him receive his college diploma. Parents don't stop seeing those memories, even when their children do. Finally, I pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. He answered. Dad. His voice sounded distracted. Music played loudly in the background. People laughed nearby. Hey, son. Is now a bad time? I'm at a client dinner. Can you make it quick? I swallowed my pride. I'll try. There was a brief pause. What do you need? Not, how are you? Not, is everything okay? Just, what do you need? Still, I told him everything. The scan, the surgery, the insurance problem, the $4,000. I even apologized for asking. When I finished, silence filled the line. For one hopeful second, I thought he was reaching for his wallet. Instead, he sighed, a long, disappointed sigh. Dad, I don't think this is something I should get involved in. I blinked. What? You've spent years making financial decisions that put you where you are. I've worked incredibly hard to build my life. I can't keep rescuing everyone. Rescuing? I wasn't asking him to rescue me. I was asking for help staying alive. Ethan, this isn't an investment. It's surgery. I understand that. But where does it stop? Today it's surgery. Next year it'll be something else. I have employees depending on me now. I can't start writing checks every time life gets difficult. Every word landed harder than the one before. I tried one last time. I'm not asking for forever. I'm asking for one chance. He stayed quiet. Then came the sentence I'll never forget. Dad, maybe it's time you accepted that some problems aren't other people's responsibility. Click. The line went dead. 3 minutes. That was all it took. 3 minutes. To realize success had changed my son far more than I ever imagined, I sat there staring at my phone. Not angry, not crying. Just empty. Because no father expects the child he spent a lifetime protecting to make him feel completely alone. Little did I know, that phone call wasn't even the cruelest part of my week. When I finally called Linda to tell her what had happened, she said something that hurt even more than Ethan's rejection. And after hearing her words, there was only one person left I could turn to. I stared at my phone long after Ethan hung up. The screen had already gone black. My reflection stared back at me for the first time in years. I looked older than I felt. Not because of the gray hair, not because of the wrinkles, because disappointment has a way of aging a man overnight. I told myself not to be angry. Maybe Ethan was under pressure. Maybe he'd misunderstood. Maybe success had simply made him forget what desperation looked like. I wanted to believe any explanation that didn't make me question the kind of man my son had become. Eventually, I picked up the phone again. There was one more person who needed to know. Linda. She answered after the second ring. Hello? I spoke to Ethan. Oh? I told him about the surgery. There was a brief silence. Then she asked, What did he say? He refused. Another pause. Longer this time. When she finally spoke, her voice carried no surprise. Daniel, you shouldn't have put him in that position. I frowned. What position? He's worked too hard to build the life he has. He has responsibilities now. So do I replied quietly. I'm trying to stay alive. You know that's not what I mean. No, I don't. She sighed impatiently. You've spent years trying to recover financially. Ethan finally escaped all that. Why drag him back into it? Her words hit me harder than Ethan's, because they came from the woman who had once promised to stand beside me, no matter what happened. I wasn't asking him to buy me a house, Linda. I asked for help paying for surgery. You should have planned better. The sentence echoed inside my chest. Planned better. As if anyone plans to get sick. As if life sends invitations before it falls apart. Then came the words that would stay with me forever. Why don't you ask Sophie? I closed my eyes. What? She'll help if it's that important. She's always trying to save everyone. The conversation ended shortly afterward, not because we had resolved anything, because there was nothing left to say. I sat inside my truck until the sun disappeared. Ask Sophie. The thought alone made me sick. She worked harder than anyone in this family. Children's nurses didn't make fortunes. Every paycheck she earned went toward rent, groceries, student loans, and helping other people. She deserved someone taking care of her for once, not another burden, especially not me. So I decided I simply wouldn't ask. I'd figure something out. I always had. Or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. Saturday morning arrived with clear skies and unbearable heat. I spent the day repairing a broken fence behind the house. Not because it couldn't wait, because keeping my hands busy stopped my mind from wandering. Around noon, I heard tires crunch across the driveway. I looked up. Sophie's little blue hatchback pulled in. She stepped out carrying 2 grocery bags and wearing hospital scrubs beneath a light sweater. You've been ignoring my calls. I've been working. She smiled. That's funny. So have I. Before I could answer, she hugged me. For just a second, everything felt normal again. She carried the groceries inside while I followed behind. I brought your favorite chicken noodle soup. You didn't have to. I know, but I wanted to. She unpacked everything with the confidence of someone who had done it many times before. Fresh vegetables, bread, coffee, medicine for my cough, even my favorite peanut butter. I noticed she'd bought the expensive brand, the one she usually refused to buy for herself. You're spoiling me, she shrugged. I learned from the best. I laughed softly. No. You learned that from your mother. She looked over her shoulder. Did I? The question lingered in the air longer than either of us expected. We spent the afternoon talking about ordinary things. Her patients, my warehouse job, a baseball game we'd both watched. Neither of us mentioned the hospital. Neither of us mentioned my cough. By evening, she was getting ready to leave. She picked up her purse, then stopped. Dad. Look at me. I did. You've lost weight. I'm getting older. No.
You're hiding something. I forced a smile. I'm fine. She folded her arms. You've never been able to lie to me. I tried changing the subject. She didn't let me. You went to the doctor. I know that. I called the clinic. They couldn't tell me anything, but they confirmed you were there. My heart sank. Nurses know how hospitals work, Dad. You really thought I'd never find out? I looked toward the kitchen window, anything to avoid her eyes. She stepped closer. What did they find? I stayed silent. Her voice softened. Please, tell me. And just like that, every wall I'd spent days building collapsed. I told her everything. The scan, the surgery, the insurance, the deposit, the phone call with Ethan, even Linda's response. By the time I finished, Sophie's eyes were filled with tears, not dramatic tears, quiet ones, the kind people fight desperately to hold back. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You should have told me sooner. I didn't want you worrying. I'm your daughter. That's literally my job. I worry, I smiled weakly. I'm sorry. She shook her head. No, I'm sorry for making you think you had to carry this alone. Those words broke something inside me, because for the first time all week, someone had apologized, even though they'd done nothing wrong. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Sophie. Dad, I need you to meet me after work. Where? Maple Street Cafe. 6 o'clock. Before I could ask why, she hung up. The cafe wasn't busy. She was already sitting in a corner booth when I arrived. There was a white envelope resting on the table. My stomach tightened. Sophie, what is this? She slid it toward me. Open it. Inside, there was cash. More cash than I'd seen in years. I looked up. What did you do? It's enough. Sophie, what did you do? She hesitated, then smiled. I sold something. What? My car. The world seemed to stop. No, I found a buyer yesterday. You sold your car? I can take the hospital shuttle for a while. You drive 40 minutes every day. I'll manage. No, I'm not taking this. She pushed the envelope back toward me. Yes, you are. I'll buy another car someday. I only get one father. I couldn't speak. My throat closed completely. Then she reached into her purse again. This time, she handed me a folded piece of paper. It was a loan agreement, a personal loan she'd taken out that very morning. The amount filled the remaining gap needed for my surgery. I stared at the document. Sophie, you borrowed money too? She nodded. It'll take me a while to pay back, but that's okay. Cars can be replaced, savings can be rebuilt. But if something happened to you because I was afraid of debt, I'd never forgive myself. I covered my face with both hands. For several seconds, I couldn't stop crying. Not because of the money, because my daughter had quietly sacrificed more in 24 hours than the rest of my family had been willing to sacrifice in years. She reached across the table and held my hand, just like she used to when she was a little girl crossing busy streets. Only now, she was the one leading me. At that moment, I made myself a promise. If life ever gave me another chance, if I ever found a way to repay this kindness, I wouldn't hesitate, not for 1 second. I had no idea the opportunity to keep that promise was already on its way. Less than 3 weeks after my surgery, a certified letter would arrive with my name on it. At first, I almost threw it away. By the time I finished reading it, everything I believed about my future had changed forever. The surgery was scheduled for the following Thursday. The $4,000 Sophie had scraped together was enough to reserve my place on the operating schedule. I signed the paperwork with shaky hands. Every signature reminded me of what she'd sacrificed. Her car, her savings, a personal loan she'd never deserved to carry. I promised myself something that morning. If I walk out of this hospital alive, I'll spend the rest of my life paying her back. At the time, I thought that promise would take years to keep. Life had other plans. The morning of the surgery arrived before sunrise. Hospitals always seem different at 5 in the morning. The hallways are quieter. The lights seem brighter. Everyone whispers as if they're afraid of waking hope itself. Sophie sat beside my bed while nurses prepared me for surgery. She hadn't slept. I could tell from the dark circles beneath her eyes. You should have gone home, She smiled. And miss the chance to boss you around one more time? I laughed. You're impossible. I learned from someone. She squeezed my hand. I'll be right here when you wake up. That simple sentence somehow made everything less frightening. Not because she could change the outcome, but because I knew I wouldn't be alone. The last thing I remember before the anesthesia took over was Sophie smiling at me. Then, darkness, when I opened my eyes again. Everything hurt. My chest felt like someone had parked a truck on it. Machines beeped beside the bed. A nurse noticed I was awake and immediately called the doctor. A few minutes later, Dr. Reynolds entered the room. For the first time since we'd met, he smiled. We got all of it. I stared at him through blurry eyes. What? The surgery went exactly as planned. The mass was completely removed. We'll continue monitoring you, but your prognosis looks very good. I closed my eyes. Not because I was tired, because relief is sometimes too heavy to carry with open eyes. Recovery wasn't easy. Simple things suddenly became difficult. Walking, breathing deeply, even laughing. Every movement reminded me of the stitches beneath my ribs. Sophie barely left my side. She spoke with every nurse, organized my medication, made sure I actually ate. She even argued with the physical therapist when she thought they were pushing me too hard. You know, one nurse whispered one afternoon, your daughter hasn't left this floor except to get coffee. I smiled. That sounds like her. Meanwhile, my phone stayed unusually quiet. Ethan never called. Not once. Linda sent exactly one text message. Hope everything went well. No visit, no phone call, no questions, just 11 words. I didn't even reply. There wasn't much left to say. A week later, the doctors finally discharged me. Since lifting heavy objects wasn't allowed for several weeks, Sophie insisted I stay at her apartment instead of returning to my house. It's temporary, she said. I'll take care of you. I can take care of myself. She laughed. You can barely stand up without making old man noises. I do not. You absolutely do. For the first time in months, I laughed without forcing it. Sophie's apartment was small, one bedroom, tiny kitchen, a little balcony overlooking a parking lot. Nothing luxurious, but somehow, it felt warmer than the house I'd lived in for over 30 years. Every morning she left for work before sunrise. Every evening she came home carrying groceries or takeout. Sometimes she'd fall asleep on the couch before finishing dinner. She was exhausted. Yet somehow, she never complained, not once. I often looked toward the empty parking space outside her apartment, the one where her little hatchback used to sit. Now, there was nothing there. Every morning she walked nearly 15 minutes to catch the hospital shuttle. Because of me, that thought hurt more than the surgery ever could. 16 days passed. My strength slowly returned. One Tuesday morning, Sophie had already left for work when someone knocked on the apartment door. Not the usual quick knock. 3 firm knocks. I slowly walked over and opened it. The mail carrier stood there holding 2 certified envelopes. Daniel Harper, that's me. Need your signature. After signing, I carried both envelopes to the kitchen table. One came from the Tennessee Department of Environmental Resources. The return address immediately caught my attention. For 10 years, every letter from them had contained another delay, another inspection, another excuse. I sighed. Here we go again. I almost tossed it aside. Instead, I opened it. The first paragraph made absolutely no sense. I read it again, then a third time. The environmental restrictions placed on my 45 acres had officially been lifted, effective immediately. I leaned back in my chair. No, it couldn't be. For an entire decade, that land had been frozen under state review because of unresolved zoning and environmental complications tied to the canceled development. Now, everything had finally been cleared. I sat perfectly still. 10 years. 10 years of loan payments. 10 years of property taxes. 10 years of believing the biggest mistake of my life would stay a mistake forever. And suddenly, it wasn't. I was still trying to process the first letter when I noticed the second envelope. It came from a company I'd never heard of. Summit Ridge Commercial Development. Curious, I opened it. Inside was a professionally prepared offer letter. The first few paragraphs explained everything. While my land had remained trapped under government restrictions, a new interstate connector had been approved less than a mile away. Major retailers had already begun purchasing surrounding property. Developers were now competing for every available acre in the area. Then I reached the final page. I stopped breathing. Purchase offer. $13,800,000 cash. Closing within 30 days. I stared at the number, then blinked, then read it again. Surely, I'd misunderstood. Just 3 weeks earlier, I couldn't afford surgery. Now, someone wanted to pay nearly $14 million for the very piece of land everyone had called worthless. I looked around the empty apartment. There was no one there to tell, no one to ask if I was reading it correctly. My hands began shaking, not because of excitement, because life doesn't prepare you for moments like that. 1 minute you're worrying about grocery money, the next you're staring at a number capable of changing generations. Slowly, my eyes drifted toward the apartment window. Outside, I watched the hospital shuttle stop at the corner. Nurses climbed off one by one. Among them, I spotted Sophie walking home, tired, still carrying the lunch bag she'd packed before sunrise. Still walking, because she'd sold her car to save my life. Tears filled my eyes. I looked back at the offer letter, then back at Sophie. At that exact moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to tell Ethan. I wasn't going to call Linda. Not yet. First, I needed to find out exactly what this land was worth. Second, I needed legal advice. And third, I needed to make sure that if this miracle turned out to be real, the person who sacrificed everything for me would never have to sacrifice another thing for the rest of her life. The next phone call I made wasn't to my family. It was to a lawyer who had stood beside me when everyone else quietly walked away. And before that meeting ended, he reminded me about a document I'd almost forgotten, a document signed years earlier. That was about to change everything. For almost an hour, I sat alone at Sophie's kitchen table, staring at the offer letter. Every few minutes, I'd look at the number again. $13,800,000. It didn't seem real. Just 3 weeks earlier, I'd been wondering whether I could afford another prescription refill. Now someone wanted to buy the same land people had laughed at for nearly a decade. The irony wasn't lost on me. The very investment everyone had called my greatest failure had suddenly become my family's greatest opportunity. But I wasn't foolish enough to celebrate too early. I'd spent too many years dealing with developers who made promises they never intended to keep. I needed answers, real answers. So I made one phone call, not to Linda, not to Ethan, to the only attorney I'd ever truly trusted, Robert Mason. Robert and I had first met nearly 10 years earlier, when my construction company was collapsing under debt. Unlike most lawyers, he never spoke down to people. He explained things, he listened. More importantly, he remembered. When I called him that afternoon, he immediately recognized my voice. "Daniel, it's been a long time." "It has. What can I do for you?" "I think someone just offered to buy my land." There was a brief silence. Then he chuckled. I was beginning to wonder when this day would come. That caught me off guard. "You knew?" "I had a feeling. Commercial developers have been quietly buying property around that corridor for months. They've been waiting for the state to lift those restrictions." I leaned back in my chair. "So, the offer is real?" "It very well could be, but don't sign anything until I review every page." That was all I needed to hear. The following morning, Sophie insisted on driving me to Robert's office. Or at least, she intended to. Then we both remembered she no longer had a car. She laughed awkwardly. "I guess we're taking a rideshare." That single sentence hit me harder than she realized. She said it so casually, as though selling her only vehicle hadn't changed her daily life, as though walking to work every morning wasn't a sacrifice. She refused to complain. That was simply who she was. Robert's office hadn't changed much. Same old wooden desk, same bookshelf overflowing with law books, same coffee that somehow tasted terrible every single time. He greeted me with a firm handshake before turning toward Sophie. "So, you're the famous daughter." She looked confused. "What do you mean?" Robert smiled. "Your father has talked about you for years." Sophie's cheeks turned pink. I hope only the good things, the best things. For the first time in a long while, I felt proud, not because of money, because someone else finally saw what I'd always known about my daughter. Robert spent nearly 2 hours reviewing every page of the purchase offer. When he finally removed his glasses, he smiled. Congratulations. It's legitimate. I slowly exhaled. So, what happens now? We negotiate. He leaned forward. And trust me, they need your land more than you need their money. Over the next several days, negotiations moved surprisingly fast. The developer increased the offer twice. By the end of the week, the final purchase price reached just over $14 million, along with full payment at closing. Even hearing Robert say the number out loud felt unreal. A few days later, he invited me back to sign preliminary paperwork. Most of the meeting was exactly what I'd expected. Contracts, tax documents, identity verification. Then, right before we finished, Robert paused. Daniel, I need to ask you something. Go ahead. Are you still married to Linda? Legally? Yes. Emotionally, I honestly don't know anymore. He nodded thoughtfully, then opened an old file cabinet. After searching for nearly a minute, he pulled out a thick folder. I've been waiting for the right time to show you this again. He slid a document across the desk. The moment I saw the signatures, I remembered. 5 years earlier, the darkest period of my life. Back then, collection agencies had been calling almost every day. Linda had become terrified that creditors might eventually come after our savings and home. Ethan had just started building his company. He insisted they needed to protect themselves. His exact words still echoed in my memory. Dad, it's just paperwork. It's only to keep Mom safe if everything gets worse. I trusted them, so I signed. Linda signed. Even Ethan signed as a witness. At the time, I barely read the legal language. I simply believed my family. Robert tapped the page. Do you remember what this agreement actually did? I frowned. It separated our financial responsibilities. Correct. But it did something else. He pointed toward a paragraph buried near the middle. Linda had voluntarily transferred every future claim connected to that 45-acre property. Not just its debt, its ownership, its future appreciation, its profits, everything. I looked at him in disbelief. You're telling me, Robert nodded before I could finish. Legally speaking, that land has belonged solely to you ever since this agreement was signed. I stared at the document. 5 years. 5 years this paper had been sitting quietly inside a file cabinet, completely forgotten. While everyone assumed it only protected Linda from debt, it had also protected me from future claims. Robert smiled slightly. The funny thing about legal documents, people usually only remember the parts that benefit them. I leaned back in my chair. I wasn't celebrating. Honestly, I felt sad, because suddenly I understood something. When things looked hopeless, my own family had rushed to distance themselves from my problems. None of them imagined there might one day be something worth coming back for. Robert broke the silence. Daniel, there's one more thing. If this sale closes, you're going to receive a substantial amount of money. You need to decide what happens to it before anyone else starts making suggestions. I already knew the answer. I do, he smiled. I thought you might. The following week we met again. This time, not to discuss the sale, to discuss my future. Robert asked a simple question. Who do you trust? Without hesitation, I answered. Sophie. Not because she was my daughter, because she'd already proven who she was when there was nothing to gain. Robert nodded. Then let's protect your wishes. Over the next several hours, we created an irrevocable family trust. It would activate immediately after the sale closed. Nearly everything would transfer directly into Sophie's name under carefully structured legal protections. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, because I wanted to reward the one person who had never abandoned me. Before leaving, Robert looked directly at me. Daniel, once this trust is finalized, no amount of pressure will be able to change it. Are you absolutely certain? I thought about Ethan hanging up. I thought about Linda telling me to ask Sophie instead. Then I remembered my daughter walking 40 minutes to work every morning because she'd sold her car to save my life. I've never been more certain of anything, I signed. The pen barely left the paper before Robert smiled. It's done. 9 days later, the money officially arrived. The sale was complete. The trust had been finalized. Sophie's old loan had already been paid off without her knowledge. A new SUV had been ordered for her. The down payment for the children's learning center she'd always dreamed of opening had quietly been transferred. And for the first time in over 10 years, I slept peacefully. I should have known it wouldn't last, because while I was finally beginning to heal, someone else had discovered the property sale through public land records. They weren't calling to ask how I was feeling. They weren't calling to congratulate me. They were coming for the money. And before the sun set the next evening, there would be pounding on Sophie's apartment door. The people standing outside believed they were about to claim what they thought belonged to them. They had no idea. They were already far too late. The first knock came just after 6 in the evening. Not polite, not hesitant. 3 loud bangs that echoed through Sophie's small apartment. I looked up from the kitchen table while Sophie was finishing dinner. She frowned. "Were you expecting someone?" I slowly stood. No. The knocking came again. Harder this time, almost demanding. Sophie's face tightened. "I'll get it." "No," I said calmly. "I'll answer." I opened the door. Standing outside were 2 people I hadn't expected to see together. Linda and Ethan. Neither one smiled. Neither one asked how I was recovering. Neither one asked how Sophie was doing. Their eyes moved past me, scanning the apartment, almost like they were looking for something, or someone. Ethan spoke first. "We need to talk." Not, "Hi, Dad." Not, "Can we come in?" Just, "We need to talk." I stepped aside. "Come in." The apartment suddenly felt much smaller. Linda remained standing near the doorway. Ethan crossed his arms. His expensive watch caught the kitchen light. Everything about him screamed success, except his expression. That carried something else. Urgency. He didn't waste any time. "We know about the land." I looked at him quietly. "Oh? You sold it." "I did. For over 14 million. "So I've been told," he frowned. "You don't seem surprised." "I signed the paperwork." "I'd certainly hope not." For a brief moment, no one spoke. Finally, Linda broke the silence. "Daniel, why didn't you tell us?" I couldn't help smiling. "Interesting question." She looked confused. "Why?" "Because neither of you asked how my surgery went." Silence. "You never visited." Silence. "You never called." Still nothing. "You only showed up after hearing about the money." No one denied it, because no one could. Sophie quietly placed 4 cups of coffee on the table. Nobody touched them. Ethan leaned forward. "Dad, I know we've had disagreements, but we're family." Family. It was amazing how quickly that word returned once $14 million entered the conversation. "I agree. We are family." He smiled. "I knew you'd understand." "I didn't say I agreed with whatever you're about to ask." His smile faded. He reached into his briefcase. "I've already spoken with an accountant. I also met with a financial advisor. I think we should discuss how to manage the money." Manage, not congratulate, not celebrate, manage. I looked at Sophie. She stared down at her untouched coffee, almost uncomfortable hearing the conversation. That alone reminded me why I'd made my decision. She wasn't thinking about money. She never had. Linda finally spoke. "We've been married for 32 years. Surely you weren't planning on making a financial decision this important by yourself." I looked at her. "Where were you 3 weeks ago?" "What?" "When I needed surgery." She looked away. No. Answer me. Where were you?" "I thought—" "You thought Ethan shouldn't be involved." She lowered her eyes. "I remember." Ethan cleared his throat. "Let's not live in the past." I smiled. "The past seems pretty important today." He ignored the comment. "I've already talked with my attorney." That caught my attention. "Oh?" He believes Mom is legally entitled to a significant portion of everything. There it was. The real reason they'd come. Not concern, not guilt. Lawyers, money, claims. I slowly reached for the folder sitting beside my chair. I figured you'd say that. Robert had prepared everything, exactly as he'd promised. I placed one document in front of Linda, another in front of Ethan. Read. Linda adjusted her glasses. Within seconds, the color drained from her face. No, she whispered. No. Ethan grabbed the papers from her hands. His confidence disappeared sentence by sentence. This can't be right. It is, I replied calmly. 5 years earlier. The agreement they'd insisted I sign had done exactly what Robert explained. Linda had permanently given up every future claim connected to that property. Not just the debt, the ownership, the appreciation, everything. It had been Ethan's idea. His attorney had drafted it. His signature appeared on the final page as a witness. He read it again, then a third time, almost hoping the words would change. They're not going to change, I said quietly. They've been sitting in a file cabinet for 5 years. Ethan slammed the papers onto the table. We can challenge this. You can try. I'll take you to court. You certainly have that right. I'll prove this wasn't your intention. I nodded. And your attorney will also explain why the document was created in the first place. Silence. You remember. You wanted to protect your mother's assets. You said the land was a financial disaster. You wanted nothing connected to it. He looked away. For the first time, he had no immediate answer. Then Linda spoke. We made mistakes. Her voice sounded softer now. We were scared. I know. We should have handled things differently. Yes, she looked directly at me. But surely, we can fix this. I stared at the woman I'd spent most of my life loving. There was a time those words would have been enough. Not anymore. Linda, you had years to fix it. When I lost my business, when I lost my health, when I lost hope, you waited until I found money. The apartment became completely silent. Only the refrigerator hummed in the background. Then I reached into the folder one last time. I have something else. I handed Ethan another document. He glanced down, then frowned. What is this? The trust agreement. He skimmed the first page. His expression changed instantly. No. He flipped another page, then another. This. No. He looked toward Sophie, then back at me. You gave it to her? I did. All of it? Nearly all of it. Sophie's eyes widened. She looked just as shocked as Ethan. Dad! I didn't know. I know. I wanted it that way. Ethan stood so quickly his chair nearly tipped over. This is insane. No. It's fair. You can't seriously believe she deserves $14 million. I looked directly into his eyes. No. I believe she deserves far more than money. Money is simply the only thing I have left to give her. He laughed bitterly. She manipulated you. That sentence changed everything. Before I could answer, Sophie stood, for the first time all evening. You need to leave. Everyone looked at her, including me. She wasn't angry. She was hurt. I never asked Dad for a single dollar. I sold my car because I thought I might lose him. I borrowed money because I couldn't imagine life without my father. She looked directly at Ethan. You had the chance to help. You chose not to. So don't stand here pretending this is about fairness. It's about choices. And we all made ours. The room fell silent. Even Ethan couldn't argue, because every word was true. I slowly stood beside my daughter, still careful with my healing ribs. Then I looked at Linda, then Ethan. I think it's time. Neither of them moved, so I repeated myself. It's time to go. This time, they understood. Without another word, they walked toward the door, not defeated, just finally forced to live with the consequences of their own decisions. I closed the door gently behind them. No shouting, no dramatic exit, just silence. The kind of silence that tells you a chapter has finally ended. But neither of us realized The very next thing Sophie was about to say would leave me completely speechless, and it would become the real ending to this story. The apartment fell silent after the door closed. No shouting, no slamming doors, no dramatic last words, just silence. The kind of silence that only comes after years of unspoken pain finally come to an end. I stood there for several seconds, my hands still resting on the doorknob. Then I turned around. Sophie hadn't moved. She was still standing beside the dining table, staring at the trust agreement lying in front of her. Her eyes slowly lifted toward me. "Dad." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "You really gave me all of this?" I smiled gently. "I did." She shook her head. "No, you shouldn't have." I walked back toward the table and pulled out a chair. "Sit with me." She did. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, she spoke again. "I didn't help you because I wanted money." "I know." "I would have done it if you had nothing." "I know." "I would have done it even if we lost everything." "I know." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "Then why? Why would you give me almost everything you've got?" I reached across the table and held her hand, because one day I realized something. When I had nothing, everyone showed me exactly what they believed I was worth. I paused before continuing. Ethan saw me as a burden. Linda saw me as another problem she couldn't solve. But you, I smiled, you never looked at my bank account. You looked at your father. She lowered her eyes, wiping away another tear. "I just did what anyone would have done." I quietly laughed. "No, you did what family is supposed to do. There's a difference." She looked back at the trust papers. "I still don't feel right accepting all this." I expected that answer. It was exactly why she'd earned it. "Sophie, do you remember what you told me at the cafe?" She frowned. "What do you mean?" "The day you handed me that envelope." She thought for a moment, then her expression softened. "I said, cars can be replaced, but people can't." I nodded. "Exactly. You gave away the one thing you depended on every single day without asking what you'd get in return. You never hesitated. You simply decided your father mattered more." I smiled warmly. "So now, let me do the same." For the next hour, I told her everything Robert and I had arranged. The personal loan she'd taken out had already been paid in full. The interest was gone, every penny. She stared at me in disbelief. "You paid it off?" "The day the sale closed." She covered her mouth. "Oh, Dad, that's not all." I handed her another envelope. Inside was the title to a brand new SUV parked downstairs. She immediately shook her head. "No, I don't need a brand new vehicle." "I know, but I do need to stop worrying every time it rains that my daughter is standing at a bus stop." She laughed through her tears. "You always were stubborn. I learned from someone." This time, we both laughed. Over the following weeks, life began changing faster than either of us expected. Not because of the money, because peace had finally entered our lives. Sophie reduced her overtime hours for the first time in years. She finally started sleeping like someone who wasn't carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. A few months later, we purchased a small building near the hospital. Not for a business, for a dream. For years, Sophie had talked about opening an after-school learning center where children from struggling families could receive free tutoring, meals, and a safe place to spend their afternoons. She'd always believed no child should fall behind simply because their parents couldn't afford extra help. Now, that dream finally had a home. The sign outside the building read, "Harper Learning House." When I asked why she'd named it after our family instead of herself, she smiled. "Because this is the kind of family I always hoped we'd become." Those words stayed with me. As for Linda, she filed for divorce a few months later. This time, I didn't argue. There wasn't much left to save. Sometimes relationships don't end because people stop loving each other. Sometimes they end because one person stops showing up when they're needed the most. I wished her peace. Nothing more. Nothing less. Ethan tried contacting me several times. At first it was through emails, then letters, eventually phone calls. I read every message. I answered none of them. Not out of revenge, out of acceptance. Some conversations arrived years too late. One afternoon, Robert called to let me know Ethan had consulted several attorneys. Every one of them gave him the same answer. The agreement he'd once insisted upon was valid. The trust was valid. The sale was complete. There was nothing left to challenge. Ironically, the legal strategy he believed would protect his family's future had become the very reason he lost any claim to it. Life has a strange sense of justice. About a year later, Sophie and I were sitting on the porch of my newly renovated house. The old roof had finally been replaced. The fence no longer leaned. The porch boards no longer creaked. She handed me a cup of coffee. "You know, I've been thinking." "Oh? If none of this had happened? If the land had never sold? What do you think would have happened?" I smiled. "I would have still been the richest man I know." She looked confused. "Really?" I nodded. "Because I would have still had you." Money can buy comfort. It can buy houses, cars, vacations, security. But it cannot buy the one thing I almost lost forever. The certainty that someone loves you. Not because of what you own, but because of who you are. That certainty is priceless. Sometimes people ask if I regret everything that happened. Losing my business, the years of struggle, the heartbreak, the betrayal. Honestly, no. Because hardship has a way of revealing people's true character. Without those difficult years, I might never have known which child loved me and which one simply loved the life I could provide. The land gave me $14 million, but it also gave me something infinitely more valuable: clarity. It showed me who stood beside me when there was nothing to gain. And if life ever gives you that kind of clarity, hold on to it, because fortunes can disappear overnight. Property can lose its value. Businesses can fail. But the people who stay beside you when you have absolutely nothing, they're the greatest inheritance anyone could ever receive. As Sophie and I watched the sun disappear beyond the trees that evening, I realized something that no amount of money could ever replace. Years ago, she looked across a cafe table, slid an envelope toward me and said, "Cars can be replaced, people can't." She was right then. She's still right now. And in the end, it wasn't the $14 million that made me feel like the luckiest father in the world. It was knowing that when life tested my family, one person chose love over money, and that was worth more than every acre of land I ever owned.